So hi, welcome to End Credit Reviews on episode of kind of not really after the credits on End Credit Reviews. This is Tyler from End Credit Reviews.
And Steven from Steven Lawson Studios.
Yes, and this one is going to be different. I know that the the decade is coming to a close. I mean, it's not 1999. I kind of wish it was 1999.
Sure.
Much better year for movies, I would say.
Y2K was spooky, though.
Yeah, but everyone had a fun party.
That's true.
And with this one, kind of looking back on this decade of movies, and also it's kind of, in a way, I was thinking about what years ago the Nostalgia Critic made a video on what he thought the worst time period of movies was, and he associated that with the misusage of CGI with stories. And I can see what he was trying to say in the later half of the 90s, early 2000s. However, I gotta disagree because that wasn't the worst time period of movies. I think we're living in the worst time period of movies right now. I would say it was from this decade, the 2010s, and into this year, 2019. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't any great movies or good movies, and honestly, I do think that every decade of movies has their fair share of good and bad movies.
Sure.
But I've noticed there's a lot of problematic stuff in this decade, so I've got kind of 5 points here, so I'm going to go over it quickly, and I'll let Steven give his 2 cents on it. So, number 1, oversaturation of unoriginality and sequels and remakes and reboots. The thing is, how many times can you keep retelling the same story of, let's say, Cinderella, or King Arthur, or Robin Hood before it becomes stale? And even if they want more, let's say, representation of other kinds of people in movies, then why don't they adapt other stuff that hasn't been done before, like stories from Africa or Asia or the ancient Americas? I would be more than willing to sit down and watch those movies if they actually happen. I mean, I know Gods of Egypt wasn't really a good movie, but at least it wasn't the same old, like, Greek mythology, Norse mythology we're kind of used to seeing. It was actually different.
Sure.
In a way. And let's be real here, folks. Do we really need 8+ Fast and Furious movies?
We do not, at all.
Yeah, a protest I can get behind is stop making Fast and Furious movies. The big epitome of it all is the live-action Disney remakes. I just hate the live-action Disney remakes. There is really no incentive to try to make something unique or have a heart to it. These are just for profit. I know why they're making it, because they're easy money. But in the long run, are these movies going to hold up very well? And I would say that when this started with the Alice in Wonderland movie by Tim Burton, that was in 2010, and that kind of started the whole tidal wave of these happening. And now there's Lady and the Tramp, but thankfully it's just being quarantined to Disney+.
Right.
And yeah, I just think they're just... Why do people keep seeing these movies? Even the critics are starting to wise up for once and saying, like, they're not very good in that. So I'll let you jump into this, Steven.
Sure. Well, I gotta say, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. And I don't think you're alone in these thoughts. I think that a lot of people are feeling, especially who are fans of film and television and media consumption in general, the gripes that you have, and I also feel them. There are definite exceptions to this rule, and the biggest exception, I would say, despite the odds maybe of basically franchises just swarming the theaters and not having much space, like Scorsese says, to just show unique films on more screens. The exception to that is horror. Horror recently has gotten, despite the odds, some really good, interesting new films, and even ones that I don't necessarily think are as great, like Get Out or Us. At least horror as a genre is getting some more recognition right now. And that is something genuinely positive if the rest is a dumpster fire. And I'm not completely convinced that's entirely true. I have a bit of a nuanced perspective on this. I will say, especially for the last 5 years, so 2015 to, coming into 2020 here, I think you are very correct, and a lot of that is due to our pandering, as we've discussed before, just in passing during these videos, to China and other markets. Um, in the way that we're pandering so blatantly to them, it is clearly at the price of good storytelling, because I've even heard my mother is a teacher at the university here, and she has um, discussed things like this with a lot of her students who are coming to learn from China, from India, and some of their favorite movies I've talked with them about. And they clearly are a big fan of like the Marvel movies, Star Wars, Transformers, and stuff like that, because there's not a lot of words that they have to understand. It's a lot of big, pretty things happening, and from a very basic standpoint, that makes sense. That the general populace, especially if you're not going to learn a second language as quickly, would be drawn to the big spectacles like that. I will say, though, it definitely has been at the sacrifice of, the artistic side of filmmaking, and that has been very much pushed either to the side or underground in terms of just, I'm going to release this for free. It's going to be at like 2 theaters for a weekend. That you're seeing that a lot more, and that really is tragic. I personally believe that kind of 2005 to maybe just short of 2015, but I would dare to say maybe 2012 was maybe the cutoff point, is one of, I think it's a weird time frame, but there were a lot of great, big budget things being made during that time period. So, especially those years in particular. And also, I guess you could bring it back to like the edge of 2000. So it's like a 15-year span, or maybe like 12 years, that I think a lot of good things were being released, and they changed the course of how we look at films, how films appear visually. It's okay to make a dark movie, things like that, for the mainstream, that have contributed in a lot of positive ways, but also in pandering to increasingly growing larger economies, and other outside factors such as that. We are, especially in the last few years, with Disney just absorbing so much of other companies into one conglomerate and not risking anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We are manifesting the problem with franchise fatigue at its peak. And I personally, I try to look at the positives, because I think, for example, that seeing DC live action universe, I've always wanted to see that. I'd like to see it commit a little more to what it is and not try to copy Marvel, which is actually for some reason controversial to people, which I find insane. But there are so many people that are pretend that Marvel has this master formula, and that everyone needs to almost either replicate that in a unique way or something. But no, to be successful, it's clear you need to have your own dynamic thing that's separate. Marvel found a formula that it exploited, and people are already starting to wane off of, but it worked because it was its own thing for a while. And so DC and the MonsterVerse, for example, with Godzilla, that's having some success, especially outside of the United States. So I really think that there is some light at the end of the tunnel here, and we're just in the middle of a lot being sorted out right now. But in terms of the artistic side of filmmaking, I really do sympathize with the argument that specifically is suffering. So I guess if I were to cram all of that nonsense, or what I've been talking about, into a short message, I'd say it has been great for franchises, but it has been poor for quality detail-oriented filmmakers.
Yeah, definitely. And also I wanted to bring up the example of Battleship, because it's like, okay, we get a movie that, for one, is based off, okay, a board game that people are aware of. Second, we're going to rip off the Transformer franchise. Third, we're going to have some obvious product placement. Fourth, we're going to have Rihanna, who's not an actress, as an actress in the movie. We're going to have a model like Brooklyn Decker, who's not an actress, as an actress in the movie. And again, more, bowing down to China with some scenes in ways, and that's a terrible movie, by the way. Yeah, it's been said the worst kind of writers, the ones that have nothing to say, so they just copy and paste what's popular at that time.
Very much
and
so.
I don't know if I brought this up, but recently I've been working on a video, probably up by the time this gets put up, is my thoughts on that Disney Nutcracker movie, where obviously it was the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland ripoff.
Right.
Self-plagiarism much?
Yeah, self-plagiarism, boy, that is a concept that I still find super cringy. And actually, the one I notice, maybe not the most, but most prominently in pop culture when he does grace us with his presence, is James Cameron. He rips himself off so often, and I won't get on my soapbox, but I just get so sick of not only the public just filleting his ego, but also, him blatantly just recycling. And
I will say, I actually noticed that James Cameron kind of influences kind of my writing stuff, where he says he writes intelligent roller coaster rides. Like the first two Terminator movies and Aliens and True Lies. Those much better movies, not the Avatar stuff.
Or Titanic for me. You may disagree on that, but that
had its moments.
That to me is as grievous of a...
I think we can both agree that LA Confidential should have won Best Picture that year over Titanic.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, great movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it before. Now, the reason why, Steven, just to clarify things, I know why you would say it started maybe several years ago, but the reason why is kind of like how... I know World War II technically started in 1939, but various historians would argue that started about several years prior because of Nazi Germany's expansion to other European countries and Japan declaring war on China, and also the Spanish Civil War happening. So these events that kind of preluded to that. So what I'm trying to say is that there are certain movies that came out during the early 2010s that were kind of these seeds that were planted that eventually grew into the problems that we're having right now.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah, that I wasn't trying to dispute at all. I think that's pretty clear.
So my second point, and why I think we are living in the worst time period of movies, is the current state of animation. Now, it kind of ties into the first one with Pixar over-reliant on sequels, as well as Illumination Studios just keep making nothing but kind of painfully average and forgettable movies that somehow keep making a lot of money. And I think the reason why is because in the past, like 20 years ago, hand-drawn animation was more common, and it may have been more expensive and time-consuming, but there was that quality filter, and studios were more careful of what movies they decided to greenlight. Compared to computer animation, it's cheaper and faster, so we're seeing more animated movies, but they tend to be not so good. So that's just my thoughts on it, and bring back hand-drawn animation, and kind of the reason why I'm looking forward to watching that Klaus movie on Netflix.
Yeah, no, I sympathize with this one a lot too, and I would almost completely agree with this. I know some people would disagree in terms of, especially cartoons being made right now. There seem to be a lot of people really hyped on shows like, well, this is basically over at this point, but Adventure Time and
Rick and Morty.
No, Rick and Morty's its own thing, but like especially kids cartoons. So Adventure Time, Steven Universe. I think those are absolute lame sauce shows. But less so, I'd say there are exceptions like Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh yeah, that's really good. I'm not saying there are any good animated movies.
Oh no, I get that, but I'm saying that there are people that would raise points like those, and I certainly think that Tyler is much more correct on this, that it's easier to just pump out some 3D rendering and get it moving. And again, back to sequels, yeah, we are seeing a lot of animated sequels, especially Frozen 2, for example, coming out in, what, few days?
I don't know. Oh, we'll be out by then, by the time this video gets put up.
But, yeah, no, I would say that you're largely right, and I personally do prefer the crispness of hand-drawn animations, personally, so...
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I've noticed too that there's been some good animated movies aside from that Spider-Man movie. I don't know if you've seen Loving Vincent, or that movie about Vincent van Gogh. It looked like a literal painting coming to life. That was pretty good. Mm-hmm. And there's other ones too, I would say. But the thing is, I've yet to see an animated movie within this decade that I can say that was like near on par with like the Iron Giant in terms of quality.
Oh, sure.
Like, that's one of my favorite animated movies right there. And I think, and also it's one of those movies that just because, it failed at the box office doesn't reflect the quality of the movie.
True.
I think it's one of the best movies to fail at the box office, such as like Citizen Kane and It's a Wonderful Life were box office failures, but people love those movies.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree, and I personally am... also, probably just because of my age now, I will always be mostly drawn more towards the animated films and shows of my childhood, because that's how I'm used to it. But I will say, to defend at least a modicum of the population out there, that there are exceptions to that rule, and things have returned, like the final season of Samurai Jack recently, as well as Primal. I don't know if you've seen that on Adult Swim. I've heard of it,
but I haven't watched it.
But while there is a lot of processed corporate nonsense just being pumped out as schlock by Illumination and whatever, there are why am I forgetting his name right now? Ryan Gendry, or whoever made, or Gendry Chai, whoever produced Primal and Samurai Jack and the Clone Wars.
Oh yeah, Star Wars, the Clone Wars, the micro series.
Right. He is an example of someone who is still working and is going to bust his ass to make quality animation to this day that does more so follow the 2D hand-drawn animation style. So in general, I completely agree that this decade especially has seen this area go down in quality, but there are exceptions.
Yeah, I mean, there's been talks about, I don't know if you know who Don Bluth is, but he was a former Disney animator who directed The Secret of NIMH, An American Tale, Lamb for Time, Anastasia, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and there's been talks about maybe we'll make another animated movie sometime. And he's also teaching courses online on animation, like hand-drawn animation, which I think is pretty cool.
Is he? That is really
cool.
For
a guy in his, I think, 80s now. I'm like, yes, I'm like, if I had the money and time, I definitely would do it.
Another thing just real quick I thought I'd mention that occurred to me is I know that a lot of what we could be seeing that could similarly, but in a different aspect, be a problem to the subject we were talking about just before, but with animation, is I know, for example, the executives at Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon started cutting a lot of its animated shows and stuff for either this just processed schlock or live action things.
Yeah, iCarly.
And that sort of thing could really be putting a lot of damage on the industry to this day, and it's kind of just something that it happened like around 2010, so it's been a while and we don't think about it as much. But
in the early 2000s, with computer animation just really putting a lot of hand-drawn animators out of work.
Right, but that mentality could still be lasting to this day and affecting this in a way we don't think about as much.
Yeah. All right, so more on a heavier note is something we think we would both agree upon. Identity politics. This is when people think that a movie that could be pretty average in quality, and they think, oh, it's amazing if it, caters to a certain demographic of people.
Yes.
And I would say an early example, the identity politics coming into play would be Bridesmaids. And I know it's unpopular of an opinion, but I think Bridesmaids is overrated. Maybe because I'm just a guy, but the thing is, I don't think the movie was really that funny. A lot of it felt like these improv SNL type of skits. And I'm willing to bet this movie was the same exact dialogue, jokes, and setups, but except if they were men and it was called Groomsmen, a lot of the critics would be like, it's just another generic hangover wannabe. But because, it was a bunch of women, I think just because some guy that no one heard of said women aren't really as funny as men, they'll feel like, oh, he's wrong. Look how funny they are. Look how funny they are. I mean, what about Hocus Pocus? That movie's hilarious. I really like that movie a lot, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And there's other examples in the past. I'm figuring off the top of my head. There have been funny women, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Especially Hocus Pocus. I'd rather watch Hocus Pocus any day over Bridesmaids, okay?
Sure.
Way better. And I think a lot of people would agree with me on that.
It's the guy next to you would.
Yeah. Yeah, but then probably the most attractive Sarah Jessica Parker ever looked, but...
Outside of a stable. What?
Oh, and Ed Wood, that was when she said, do I ever have a face that looks like a horse?
And the internet will never forget.
Oh, yeah, she did her ancestry, and she actually... one of her ancestors was accused of being a witch in the Salem witch trials.
Oh, no.
That's great and ironic, but anyway. But also, like, Get Out, I think is a pretty decent horror movie. But then people were like, "Oh, Jordan Peele's a new Alfred Hitchcock," and "Oh, it's a great movie." And I'm like, okay, first of all, Alfred Hitchcock had to make several really good movies before he was recognized as a really great director.
Mm-hmm.
Second, that movie has some obvious continuity errors, and I feel like the movie is a ripoff of Selfless. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It was with Ben Kingsley, who's an old wealthy guy, wants a new young body, and it's Ryan Reynolds' character. And it's like, what would make more sense? If you're a wealthy, rich old guy, you want a new young body, would you rather handpick someone like Ryan Reynolds who looks like him, or some random guy that gets kidnapped from the streets? I'm just saying. Mm-hmm. And if the whole like symbolism and meaning, ask me what it means, is like, oh, a certain group of people are being oppressed, then why would said by these wealthy elites? So why would said wealthy elites want to be these oppressed, so-called oppressed people? I'm just saying, like, it makes no sense. It just contradicts itself. I mean, if you had to remove the meaning of it or whatever gobbledygook in the director-writer's mind, it just makes no sense, at least in my opinion. And also Black Panther, another kind of run-of-the-mill Marvel MCU movie, but then, it's the first superhero movie nominated for Best Picture. So you're telling me The Dark Knight and Spider-Man 2 weren't good enough for that?
Crimes committed, I tell you.
Yep, and also we had Captain Marvel, where the marketing was a hero in that, and I think it did a lot very, very well because it's part of the MCU, which is established, and a lot of people got suckered into thinking they had to see that to understand Endgame. I know I'm kind of spitballing here, but the thing is, I just thought it was kind of just a painfully boring movie, and as to quote like Screen Junkies on his trailer video on it, but comparing to most other female comic book movies, it's Citizen Kane by comparison. Maybe that's why. But it's no Wonder Woman.
That's true.
But yeah, I just hated that people are just thinking it's better than just because of that sort of thing. I'll give you your 2 cents on this now.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, I'm largely in agreement. I am sick and tired of this crap. And while Tyler is complaining about this now, I think this has always been happening. It's just growing. The especially when it comes to like the Academy Awards, boy, are they in a hurry to rush to the latest in victim complex. And I mean, The Shape of Water was an example of that. Just like that was last year, wasn't it? Or was it the year before?
Year before, but yeah, newsflash, people, the average American doesn't want to see a woman committing bestiality with a fish man, okay?
and I'm not even so much, literally, conflating it with that, but I mean, the fact that films like Tyler has mentioned, like Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Get Out, Bridesmaids, they get, and Ghostbusters for that matter, for God's sake.
Well, that was like, people were really divided. Critics loved it,
still,
but audiences were like, no.
But the critical establishment here is kind of what I'm getting at. They are so clearly just filleting themselves on this stuff of, oh, how virtuous are we to, go out of our way to just shoehorn this cheap shit in.
And recently Terminator Dark Fate.
Yes. That I am so sick of it. And maybe I'm alone here. I don't think I am. But I would thoroughly love some sort of objective technical standards be applied to these processes. Like, if you're going to take yourself seriously as an institution, and that's not to say, everyone's opinions must conform to a certain set of standards, but like, if you're going to have something like Academy Awards, which are supposed to be industry standard, this is the consensus of, this major institution on filmmaking, wouldn't you like to have some sort of vague sense of objectivity in terms of technical terms? No, let's just jerk each other off about how virtuous we are. That's what it has turned into over at least the past 2 to 3 decades, and I am so sick of that. Like, I'm convinced that the last legitimate Academy Award ceremony I can remember off the top of my head was a Lord of the Rings being nominated, because that was at least technically impressive.
Yeah.
There have been so many just blatant examples of this. And while Tyler and I may agree and disagree about certain, nuances in these films, as a whole, we can agree that they are overemphasized, especially for the political times we live in. And some sort of standard here would be really welcome by me, to be reinforced in this industry, so that, there's some sort of, you can't just cheaply plug in things for the feelies. I don't know. That's my 2 cents on it, but I think we're largely in agreement.
Yeah, I mean, and also one thing I want to bring up before we move on is that the thing is, I know you're a big Transformers fan in that, and it's one thing I find hypocritical, and I was thinking about this a few days ago, that it seems like every time they want more representation in movies by a certain demographic of people, they want the most clean and inoffensive version of those characters.
That's exactly
They
right.
don't really want other dialects. I mean, it's fine for, let's say white people to have different dialects, so Southern accent, Canadian accent, Midwestern, New Jersey accent, but when with the other ones, they were like, oh, we had to have the most inoffensive, clean ones. We can't have any type of variety with it.
Right.
So with my examples, like, oh yeah, Transformers is like, we need more diversity in the Autobots, even though they're all robots and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So then we got the twins, and they all complain like, hey, why is there that? And I noticed in these live-action Disney remakes of Beauty and the Beast, they shoehorned, non-white actors and actresses into the movies. Not saying that it makes those movies bad or anything. I just feel like I've noticed they're always portrayed in a positive way, and every time there's a more negative or iffy character, it's not them really, which I feel like it's kind of stupid. So I just hate this. Like, it's really hypocritical. At the end of the day, it's just, and people think like, oh, it's so progressive, it's so thing. No, at the end of the day, they're just trying to make money. They're just tricking you to buy into their thing. Because at the end of the day, they don't care about that sort of thing. They care about making a profit.
That's exactly right. They are as hollow as your wallet by the time that they have their way with you. So I just mentioning Michael Bay real quick, because I got to get my word in on that. Also, along the lines of Ken Watanabe as Drift, the blue samurai Autobot in the 4th and 5th Transformers, I was similarly surprised that didn't take a similar amount of crap, especially from, our pandering to the Eastern markets these days, with China and Japan for that matter. Having a samurai stereotype in a robot, I thought, oh boy, here we go again. And in the 5th one, having the main villain be a woman. Oh boy, we better look out. I'm by no means saying that everyone is obligated to love every Michael Bay film or something. I personally find that unless you're Helen Keller, you'd be dishonest to say they don't look impressive. But I find him and a couple other directors who, and even actors like Mark Wahlberg, who have clear politically conservative tendencies or leniencies. I have a great compassion for them because there is a clear disdain amongst the industry for them, people like Bay just giving them the finger and saying, I'm going to make what I want and y'all can suck it.
Yeah, don't drink the soy, don't be woke.
Right, and while I don't always agree with the message that's behind something or whatever, if you don't have the right to put it in film or your creative expressions, how are you supposed to express yourself, for God's sake? I mean, these guys are making visually amazing spectacles at the very least, and they should get, in some sort of objective society, at least a tip of the hat for that. And I digress. I could go on about this, but I very much agree that I also want to draw the fact that conservative filmmakers have got it rough in this industry because, not to mention, if they don't pander ideologically, in addition to the fact of the in-group, just being with the neo-lib crowd that runs, the film industry.
Yeah, like woke men recently.
Yes.
Makes us appreciate the Zack Snyder movie a lot more.
Absolutely. Those directors have their work cut out for them, and even if I don't agree with them, from a principled standard, you gotta call it like it is, and they do have an unfair disadvantage against them right now. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So number 4, I would say another divisiveness kind of time people are living in is polarizing opinions. Yes. And I really blame this on Rotten Tomatoes, which I believe is the biggest fake news site in the world. For example, Facts. I always bring up this example from time to time how they labeled the remake of the Mummy from the 90s with Brendan Fraser. It's a movie that people look back on 20 years later and they say, like myself, oh, we love this movie, it's awesome, and that it's gotten more attention over the years, and it still holds up today. It still holds up and stands the test of time, unlike other movies from that time period like American Pie and American Beauty, I would say, to an extent. And that movie is labeled as rotten. But then if you look at The Amazing Spider-Man, a movie that was anything but fresh, it's labeled fresh in Rotten Tomatoes, where it just recycled the origin story again in a pretty lousy way. And also keep in mind, audiences and critics seem to be on odds with each other. For example, audiences love The Last Jedi. Critics I sound like a shill for the Kathleen Kennedy right now. It'd be funny. It's like, oh, sorry, and there's no way Kathleen Kennedy is holding weapons to our necks right now.
Right.
I gaffed right there. Sorry. Anyway, so I meant to say is that audiences did not really like The Last Jedi that much, but critics liked it. Or, for example, audiences really liked the new Godzilla movie, but critics not so much. And again, it kind of shows that polarization opinions, and people are starting to question the critics more and more. And I feel like this also deals in what I would call tribalism, where people either overreact and think a movie is either a crime against humanity or the best thing since sliced bread. And rarely is any movie like that. When Jurassic World and the first Disney Star Wars movie came out, people overreacted to them. They're like, oh, it's amazing in that. But looking back, they're just kind of fine, I guess. And I would say the same and then the opposite end, I would say movies like Gods of Egypt, The Cloverfield Paradox, people I feel like overreacted to those and like, oh, they were terrible. Like, they were just okay. They were definitely not good. But even to an extent, that Disney Nutcracker movie was kind of just in the middle to a way. And I felt like it was, had its moments, but dumb cliched, I would say. But yeah, that's just my thing on it. And I feel like people should get more in touch with each other. And again, I called out a critic one time on Twitter, and he ended up blocking me for speaking the truth.
Oh man, who would have thought that someone who expresses their opinion couldn't handle another opinion criticizing them?
You can't handle the truth.
If the phrase "okay, boomer" wasn't more applicable to that, Critic just blocking you right there. That is totally worthy. But yeah, on this issue, 100% agreement. And the tragedy to me is it didn't happen sooner. Like this, movement of not trusting Rotten Tomatoes and trying to, have more of a, audience consensus versus critical, or at least establishment critical consensus. It came too late and has unfortunately torn down some things that shouldn't have been torn down. But I definitely agree. This woke culture bullshit that has manifested, especially in Rotten Tomatoes, and whenever I see a movie bragging, it's got a high grade on Rotten Tomatoes. To me, that is a liability. That at this point says, that the shills are out in the streets for this movie, so take it with a huge grain of salt. And to see that starting with, especially, I think some of the examples are, The Last Jedi was one of the most prominent ones. Captain Marvel was another one where people kind of just pulled back. And I'm in absolute agreement. I find that if you're looking for something, obviously you should just decide for yourself and go see it.
Yeah, the individual is their best critic.
But I personally find myself, if I am curious, I'll look briefly at IMDb or Metacritic or just a couple of places. But ultimately, I decide for myself, do you think this looks like it's worth your time? If so, go see it. And that's really how people should feel. And maybe over time, when more sensible people get into the discussion, we will oversaturate this group of meatheads that are just following hype trains from what a few people say, either on YouTube or in an article or on Twitter. And we can get some sense of diversity again in perspective and thought, not just these hype trains that are propelled in a very few select places.
Yeah, definitely. And also keep in mind, generations pass by, and there are probably older generations that when the first Star Wars movie came out probably didn't care for that movie that much. And I've noticed when the Nostalgia Critic posted his review on Van Helsing, the comment section was filled with people saying how much they loved the movie. The top comment was, "I unapologetically love this movie."
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That it just shows that generation gap. Like, again, we'll probably later, I don't know, before or after this video comes out, the prequel effect I would like to talk about. But yeah, anyway, so the fifth and final, but before I get to that, I wanted to say quickly is that, when I wrap up point 4, is I feel like saying a movie is either the good or bad Rotten Tomatoes logic is like the equivalent of the Frankenstein monster going like, good, bad. I mean, there's plenty of gray area where something's just okay.
Absolutely.
And that's why I prefer Metacritic better, because a lot of times they'll go into what a critic thought. If they thought a movie or something was just okay, they'll have it yellow for mixed, because a lot of movies are just kind of mixed bags.
Sure.
In general, it's not like, oh, it's good, oh, it's bad.
And come to think of it, just when, thinking in the moment here, when you hear our reviews when we talk about things, it's often 2.5 out of 10, 8, 7, sort of scale. So, I mean, realistically, there's a lot of nuance in this area, and I think realistically, money is a propelling factor of the hot-cold effect.
And they don't want to lose their, pass to go see the screenings of movies.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I think we are in large agreement over this area, and Rotten Tomatoes is the biggest fake news website. Absolutely.
This video is probably going to get flagged for hate speech, and also maybe China will take it down first because we're Alright, so then finally, my fifth and final point is streaming services. Now, I'm not trying to say streaming services is bad, but my issue with streaming services is that movies are not as special anymore if you think about it, because back in the day when you had to go, let's say, Blockbuster or some home video rental store, even, the Red Box or the Cube, whatever it's called, you physically hold that movie in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to be careful what movie you chose on Saturday night. Because let's say you were iffy about the movie, you had to be stuck with the movie. But nowadays, you can go on Netflix or some streaming service and you watch the first 15 minutes. You don't like it, it's another movie I can watch. And you can't really physically hold it. And movies are not as special. They're more about the quantity than the quality, which I feel like is kind of concerning. And ultimately, what kind of ties in at an end cap for why I think we are kind of living in the worst time period of movies, I would say, because it contributes to that, just an oversaturation of unoriginality, playing it way too safe. Also, the whole agendas behind it and the out-of-touch critical opinions on things. So that's all I have to say about that. But any final word on that, Steven?
Yeah, sure. I would say when it comes to the streaming thing, it is, of course, yet again, a mixed bag. I do see a lot of opportunity in the future for this. And there's an argument I've heard a lot of people make that people are moving away from going to theaters that are going to rip you off with, $10 drinks and everything, to just get a comparable theatrical setup in your own home and then stream the things. And while I agree that does lose some of the theatrical experience, ultimately for more individual content creators out there, this could be a positive. People in way more different, backwoods filmmakers, if you will have more of an opportunity to shine and just blow up on Reddit or things like that, and then have their time in the spotlight. But on the other hand, we will lose what made cinema in terms of going to the theater, and also for that matter, you mentioning like going to Blockbuster and renting a VHS tape or a DVD. We have lost that in the culture, and that is pretty tragic. And I would also add, this is a similar problem in the gaming industry, where we're increasingly going to digital everything. And for now, we can count our lucky stars that at least we can download games digitally, so they're physically in the system, or we can download it to a USB cartridge or something in theory. But at some point, they're talking about, no, you literally just rent the games from us. And at a certain point, I have a deep concern about, it kind of goes even beyond just filmmaking and games, just the commodification of, okay, you rent everything from us. There's one group like Disney that just buys up everything, and we're not going to let you own physical copies anymore. You must rent the right to watch these things from us.
And then, before they go back into the vault.
Right.
And then, I would like to see maybe a parody spoof thing where someone breaks into the Disney vault.
The Robin Hood for film. Yeah, basically.
Mission Impossible spoof.
Breaks into the House of Mouse for free movies for everyone. But yeah, no, I agree. And
it's all empty when they get there. It's kind of like when what's his name was saying, "Oh, here's a safe of Al Capone, secret safe," and then there's nothing in there.
Right, absolutely. But yeah, I guess to wrap things up in a bow, I'd say that you're largely right. There are definitely some positives that we've mentioned, and rare gems, especially I would mention the horror film genre, and even to a certain extent the fact that certain franchises are succeeding right now. If you're a fan of those franchises, I think it's a great time for you overall, and that should be noted for the history books in the film industry and TV media consumption in general. But it is, I would say, especially over the last 5 years, as other economies are sort of coming into play and monopolization seems to be becoming an increasingly more tangible effect, that you're right, that especially the last 5 years, there is a change that is a very compelling argument that the media climate is changing for the worse, especially if you love unique individual content creators that have their own space to shine and display it publicly. Maybe in the long term with streaming services this will be combated, but I definitely don't see it will survive the same way as traditional cinema again, and that is a bit tragic.
Yeah, I mean, even when television was first created, the movie industry was kind of suffered a little bit because less movies were in production by that point, and there was gimmicks like, well, now it's standard widescreen, and 3D, of course, comes back and forth throughout the decades.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, that was another thing they're trying to do, and also we see in theaters like 4D motion sensor and all these other things as well.
Smell the monkey farts of the Amazon.
I remember in the Red Letter review for Avatar, I was like, so movie's gonna turn to theme park rides?
Basically.
And then they were saying it for years. They were talking about the Scorsese thing about criticism about the MCU and that. But yeah, but anyway, this is our just opinions on, well, mainly my opinion, and Steven's, chimes in here and there on it, and that's just my opinion on it. But I'm just hoping in the next decade to come, we see improvements on this. We get out of this rut of maybe get at least. I don't want to see far less live-action Disney remakes. I don't want to see more Fast and Furious movies. And I most definitely do not want any of the identity politics garbage in my movies. I want to have some entertainment. You can't have some interesting message and commentary, but you should never put that at the forefront and good storytelling in the back burner, okay?
I agree.
Because that should always come first. That's a big reason why District 9 works and Elysium doesn't work. Because District 9 had a bit of a message, but it cared more about its story and characters. Elysium failed because it tried to get some kind of message and symbolism, and it just was a sloppy mess of a story. By the same director, by the way, too.
Yep, completely agreed.
Alright, so anyway, this is Tyler from Anchor Reviews.
And Steven from Steven Lawson Studios.
And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Well, kind of after the credits, but whatever, it's its own unique thing, and we hope to make a lot more in the future, and maybe by the point this video is made, it'll probably be close to New Year's Eve. But anyway, Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Didn't realize
that was my cue.
That was a delayed reaction. I don't know if you've seen like the New Adventures of Batman, the animated series, but there's a part where Robin punches Batman. In the original cut, Barbara Gordon is Batgirl. Such a delayed reaction. But I noticed in the Blu-ray version that they re-edited. They did a special edition thing where they noticeably shortened her response so it wasn't unintentionally funny delayed.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if that's a Mandela effect thing, but I will say if you're going to George Lucas something, do that to fix mistakes. I would say that's the only time you should do that. Anyway, please like and subscribe.